Hello everyone, come in, sit down. Now, I missed a lot of stuff over Christmas and just before Christmas because I've been ill and I pre-recorded a lot of things, but in a lot of ways it seems that everyone's kind of gone crazy and the skeptic community, such as it is in something of an uproar. And this has been because of the Kilroy event, it has been because of Crown Tea, and now it's kind of segueing into more things to do with discussion around the alt-right and so on, with the stream and the craziness that Andy Warski has been involved in. And I'm seeing a lot of things that remind me of what happened with Atheism Plus, which, just mentioning that probably made a bunch of people yawn and not again, here we go sort of thing, but I think it's worth noting. See, prior to Atheism Plus, we had a very broad atheist/skeptic community that had all kinds of people from all walks of life, from all kinds of politics, who were unified around the idea that ideas should be subject to examination, that nothing was sacred, that everything should be looked at. But there were entryists from the far pseudo-left, the social justice warriors as we now call them, who were allies because skeptics and rationalists and atheists happened to have a lot of criticisms and so on for creationism and the evangelical right going back to the 80s and 90s. So they assumed that because atheists and skeptics were critical of the evangelical right and were generally quite supportive of things like abortion and women's rights and so on, that they would be fully on board with all of their ideas. Some of the more nonsensical ideological positions coming out of feminism or race studies or whatever else. And it turned out that we weren't, because there was a core of skeptics and rationalists who didn't care what an idea was or where it came from. I'm trying to avoid the term true skeptics here, but maybe it applies. And they were unwilling to go along with these ideas without examining them. And when they did examine them, they weighed them, they measured them, and they found them wanting. And this resulted in this split, where the politicized skeptics of the pseudo-left ended up kind of splitting off and doing their own thing, and we had a kind of resurgence in the skeptic community from flogging the dead horse, pretty much, that was religion, to criticizing ideological positions of the crazier end of the left. You know, the social pseudosciences, the ideological nonsense, all of that. So while there was a lot of damage done and a split in the community, what it really meant was that the skeptic community shed a lot of these political entryists, and I think became a lot stronger and better for it. Now what we seem to be seeing is a similar thing occurring, but with the crazy people on the far right. So they seem to have assumed that because we were against the excesses of the crazy left, that we would be on their side, we would be their allies, and we would go along with their crazy ideas on the far right, which has turned out not to be true. And we're seeing a lot of very similar behaviour. You can call it a horseshoe theory if you want, but a lot of moralising and outrage and stuff going on. That's what we're seeing, you know, accusations, wild accusations, conspiracy theories, all kinds of nonsense and personal attacks and rumour mongering and all this kind of shit that we've all seen before, just coming from the other side. Why would you think, if your ideas are extreme and unscientific, why would you think that the skeptic or atheist community as a whole would go along with it? I don't know why they would think that, and I don't know why anyone is any more upset this time than they were previously during the Atheism Plus split. You know, ideas are ideas. They either stand or fall on their own. It shouldn't matter where on the political spectrum they come from. If your idea is stupid, we will point out that it's stupid, probably mock and ridicule you all about it, and we will debunk it. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, and yet a lot of people are acting like children. Take the Kraut and Tea situation, for example. I think you need to grow up about that whole thing. Yeah, Kraut got emotional and went off on one, but the core idea was sound. You know, making a list of people just like we had informal hit lists of creationists or social justice warriors or bedroom feminists in the past that people would make videos on, make responses to, like Sarkeesian and Francesca Ramsey and all the rest of them, you know. There's nothing wrong with knowing who you're going after and monitoring them to see what kind of material they're putting out, so that you can take that material and debunk it and take it apart and show that it's nonsense. There's nothing wrong with those aspects. And the idea of getting together a kind of dirty dozen of people who knew about science and were YouTube personalities, there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, they understand the format, they understand the platform, and they, to one degree or another, understand the science. So they're in a good position to go after the nonsense in a reasonably authoritative manner, right? So there's nothing wrong with any of that. The only part that's actually problematic, shall we say, the only part that's really an issue is the issue of doxing, and so far it doesn't actually seem like anyone was publicly doxed except Coach Red Pill. And there, I think, given it revealed that the guy is an opportunist and a con man, I think there's an argument to be made that that is an acceptable thing to do in that instance. Is more or less harm done by exposing that kind of person. If someone is, I think Jeff Holiday made the comparison, if someone is selling nonsense medicine or fake cancer cures or whatever, you know, it's a good idea to expose them for that. So I don't really have a problem with the exposing of Coach Red Pill, and it doesn't seem like anything else went any further. The intention may have been there, but that's pretty much on Kraut, not on anyone else who was there. You know, guilt by association is a fallacy for a good reason. And there's nothing wrong with any of these people being against the ideas of the alt-right any more than there's anything wrong with any of us being against the ideas of the crazy pseudo-left. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, that's the whole point, to disagree, to have ideas battle each other in the marketplace of ideas. I mean, we just had this debate that Richard Spencer was on, where he got absolutely destroyed in a 1-2 punch between Sargon mocking him and Styx underlining all the practical problems with everything he was saying. I know people are going to disagree with me, but the people that are going to disagree with me are likely people who are already persuaded by the alt-right. I think any on-the-fence person, anyone in the middle, is just going to look at that and see how ludicrous and stupid and reactionary and emotive Spencer looks, and he's not going to come off well. And this is why we should do these things, to expose these people and to expose their arguments. A lot of people on the crazy pseudo-left didn't want this to go ahead at all, but I think it's done wonders for exposing how much of a bellend Spencer is. So I don't particularly have a huge issue with Kraut's server as it went down, because nothing really happened. I do have an issue with people making a mountain out of a molehill and really going after people like Jeff Holiday, who have done so much good work. They've established a degree of trust. But people like Warski just seem to have turned on all their former friends and allies and so on in pursuit of a quick buck. There doesn't seem to be a principle there, just drama, 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 drama. And that doesn't strike me as a good or genuine thing to do. I unfollowed him for that, basically. It got tedious and mean, and all spun out of basically nothing. And that's pretty much the same when it comes to people like Mr. Mitaker and the whole Kilroy event. It's a disorganised mess, and that seems to be mostly Based Mama's problem and her fault. Dave seemed to over-egg it and push it too far. Based Mama seems to just not know what she's doing particularly, but maybe learning fairly quickly. Now, I know Sister Danger from a previous life. We're friends. but she's no longer involved, so I no longer have that reason to stick up for them. I did some copy editing for them. That wasn't much, so, you know, full disclosure, whatever. But the fuss around this is way too much for what has actually happened, which is not a lot, really. They're just not very organised. The paperwork, the NDAs and so on, they're not that unusual. I've organised events. I've been involved in both corporate and private events and leisure events. It's not that unusual, just covering their ass. And there were all kinds of issues around security because of ex-Muslims and others there. There were ways that they needed to cover themselves politically and media-wise, I suspect, in relation to their far-right guests. I mean, you want this to go ahead, you want it to be a free speech conference, but you need to do something to insulate yourself somewhat from any media backlash that might be calling you right-wing or whatever. And that seems to me to be the reasons behind a lot of this paperwork, to indemnify the people running it from a lot of these problems. And it's not unusual either, at all, for a convention to be run as a business, and for people involved to be taken on board as though they were, you know, working for hire for the business. Again, this is all to do with financial and other protections, and I can't really fault them from that. Maybe a little bit much considering what the conference turned out to be, but it's all understandable. There's nothing horrendous or unusual about that, but people's reactions were horrendous and unusual. Now, as the conference developed, it seems to have shifted from just a free-for-all conference into a free speech conference, with an emphasis on the value of free speech, the problems of free speech and free expression. And the alt-right people who were involved and set up their own little sort of echo chamber panel, which wasn't meant to be what was going on anyway, it's meant to be ideas fighting. They seem to have been triggered by the idea that this was changing to emphasise the importance of free speech, and deplatform themselves. It doesn't seem like they were pushed away particularly, just asked to change the emphasis of their panel, and then they threw a fit and left. You know, that's incompetence. It's still not that unusual, and again seems to be a fuss about fucking nothing. Advertising unconfirmed speakers is bad, but not completely bad. I mean, have you ever been to a music festival? You have to book a very long time in advance for a music festival. And usually the acts that they're advertising are not yet confirmed. So the lineup is constantly fluid as people come in and drop out and so on. But they advertise who is going to appear on that kind of conditional basis. This is why I have hardly ever, I don't think, in many, many years been to any of these big music festival events, because of that constant change. Yeah, it's not unusual to have people drop in and drop out. You know, these people have been invited. It's not unusual to book on that basis, but I haven't because of that basis. This is something that anyone who's been to events should know. Maybe it wasn't clear enough, but it's still not something to make a huge fuss out of. People just seem to have been massively uncharitable in a way that they haven't even been with their enemies, really. And they've allowed the far right to make hay out of all of these tiny, minuscule, meaningless things. There were people who didn't like your ideas. Big whoop. Some of them were involved in Kilroy. Again, big whoop. They still invited you to the event and wanted you to speak. So, Kraut was getting involved potentially in doxing. Okay, that's bad. Let's condemn Kraut. Let's get some apologies out of people who were involved, and by and large we've got that. No actual doxing apart from Coach Red Pill seems to have happened, and that was to everyone's advantage because it turned out he's a con man and someone who just exploits every situation he can for a buck. He's kind of riding the wave of the controversies and so on, and you can see that from the way he acts. But okay, so fucking what? All ideas are subject to scrutiny, and we absolutely should go after right-wing ideas as well as left-wing ideas, pseudo-left ideas. Absolutely we should, 100%. This doesn't have to be a bad thing. There was this resurgence after the Atheism Plus thing, and I think there could be a similar one now. So I think it's time for want of a better term, true skeptics, who are skeptical regardless of politics, who are willing to examine all ideas critically and evenly, to step up yet again and grow up and keep all this going, because we are living in a dangerously irrational and populist world, and for all we feel like we're a bubble on the internet, between us we do have a huge amount of reach and potential media influence, far more than the conventional media, and our voice is needed, and we can exert some influence on this world collectively, and some of us luckily individually. Lucky bastards. But we definitely live in an age of irrationality and nonsense and appeals to emotion, whether it be to identity on a sexuality basis or a gender basis or whatever else, or on a race basis. It's all bollocks. A lot of these arguments are bollocks. Race realism is bollocks for many of the same reasons that the wage gap argument is bollocks. Everything is nonsense, everything is bollocks, and we have to point it all out. Zang, my lovelies.
Now, Bob, consider this next question very carefully. What is your one purpose in life?
To explode, of course.